Hi, this is Adam from MakerState, and right now I'm going to take you through the next challenge in the Scratch Basics series. This challenge is called Apple Catcher, and what we're going to do in this challenge is create a simple, fun game where the player has to catch as many falling objects, in this case apples, as possible without letting any get through and hit the ground. And in doing so, we're going to learn about some exciting new blocks in Scratch, including the pick random block, which is a random number generator. We're going to learn about some operators, how to use or, greater than, and less than blocks. And we're also going to learn about using variables for the first time, which are very important. They allow us to store data, and we're going to use them to keep track of our score as the player continues to catch apples. Okay, so to get started, I'm here in a new Scratch project. I'm going to delete the cat sprite, and I'm going to pick a new backdrop. I'm going to pick this tree right here. Okay. And I'm also going to pick an apple sprite from the library. Okay, so let's think about what we want this apple to do. Basically, we want it to drop from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen over and over. And if the apple gets caught by the player, we'll add 1 to the player's score. And if the apple hits the ground, then we'll reset the player's score back to 0, and they'll have to start over again. Okay? So let's just start to think about some of the blocks that we know and we've used, and think about how we can go about first setting the apple to appear on the top of the stage, and then how to make it fall down to the bottom. So we're going to start with a when green flag clicked block, as we often do to begin our code. And then I'm going to think about how we can set the apple to appear on the top of the stage. And for that, I'm going to use a go-to-XY block. And I want you to take a look at my mouse's X and Y coordinates down here as I move my mouse around the stage. So when I bring my mouse up to the top of the stage, and if I go just above the stage, we see that my maximum Y coordinate is 180, while my X coordinate can go from negative 240 to positive 240. So what that means is if I set my Y coordinate to 180, that means that my apple will always appear on top of the stage. As far as the X coordinate, I'd like that to vary and change and actually be randomized. And there's a block that's very good for dealing with this. It's the pick random block from operators. And you see how this rounded block can be inserted into any place where we would normally use a number. And so this block will pick a random number between the two values we give it, and we want to give it two values of negative 240 and positive 240 so that we can go anywhere along the x-axis. Great. The next thing we want to do is have this apple fall down to the ground. And if we want something to move repeatedly, we're going to need some sort of loop to make it do that. And normally we'd use a forever loop. Actually, right now we're going to use a repeat until loop because this apple is not going to fall forever. It's going to fall until something specific happens. And so we can worry about setting this condition in a little while. But for now, we can just put a change y by 10, change y by negative 10 block there. And now when we press the green flag, every time we press it, the apple will reappear somewhere along the x-axis at the top of the screen and fall to the bottom, which is great. We're very close to having this already somewhat working. So repeat until what? Well, we want to repeat until we're touching this bottom edge of the stage, and some of you might be thinking, okay, I know we can go to touching and choose touching edge, and that's great. But that's going to be a little bit problematic because our apple actually begins touching the edge. So what's going to be better than that will be using an operators block to track the Y position of the apple and send it back up to the top when the Y position gets too low. And so to do this, I'm going to use a less than block from operators. And then I'm going to go to motion and scroll all the way down in motion to where I can take my sprite's Y position as this little variable block right here. And I'm going to say if Y position is ever less than negative 180, if it falls below the bottom of the stage, the opposite of the 180 that we put. for this initial go-to block. When we fall below that, then we're going to move on to the next part of our script. And what we can actually do is wrap this whole thing in a forever loop. And this way, when we run it, the apple will fall and then go back up to the top and then go back up to the top. And just with that, we've already, created this falling apple mechanic that will be the basis of our game. Now let's shift gears for a moment and program the player. And I'm picking a new sprite, and I'm going to go to this bowl right here and pick this bowl. And we're going to write a very simple script for the bowl that allows the user to move it left and right using the arrow keys. So I'm going to stop this for a moment and use the when green flag click block and say forever if key right arrow pressed, change x by 10. And I'm going to use the duplicate tool to duplicate that and say if the left arrow is pressed, change x by -10. And now we can move the bowl using the left and right arrow keys. And that's really the only script we need for this sprite. But now we can go back to the apple, and let's think about this repeat until loop again. So we're going to repeat until we're touching this bottom edge unless we touch the bowl that the player is playing as. And so what we need to do is set, a second condition that can stop our apple from falling. And the way we can do that is by using an or block. So this and or not block, these are really great blocks for setting more complex conditions. And I'm going to say repeat until y position is less than -180 or y is touching the bowl. And this way, this will keep moving until one of these two things happens. And now if it touches the bowl, the apple goes back up to the top. And if it doesn't touch the bowl, then we'll wait until it hits the bottom edge and then go back up to the top. Great. Now we need to think about keeping score and actually, keeping track of our success in keeping these apples off the floor. And what we need to do is go to data and make a variable. So if the concept of a variable is new, a variable is just a number with a name attached to it. In this case, we're going to make a variable and call it score. And the idea here is that we have this number, and the number is going to change, but we're going to call the number score no matter what. Even if my number is 0, if my score is 0, it's still called score. Or if my score is 10, it's still called score. Or if my number is 100, it's still called score, no matter what. And the reason this is important is because once we declare this score variable, we get 4 blocks, but we're going to use these two, set score and change score, to set the initial value of our score to 0 and then increase our score by 1 when we catch an apple, which begs the question, how can we tell if we're catching the apple? This falling apple loop here is repeating until we either hit the ground or touch the bowl, but we don't actually know which one we're doing when we end this loop, which means we're going to have to add an if-then-else loop here to choose between two options given another conditional. And so we're again just going to use the condition if touching bowl, but what we want to do is if we are touching the bowl after all this, then we want to add to our score. And if we're not touching the bowl, we're going to set our score back to 0. Let's see if that works. Good, good. And so every time I touch the apple, my score goes up by 1. And if I miss and let the apple fall through, my score resets to 0. So we're basically done with the mechanics of this game. This is already working, and you could, play this and see how high of a score you could get without letting an apple fall through to the ground. I'm going to shrink this apple a little bit, which I think will make it feel a little bit better. And one thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of sound to my game. And to add a sound to the game, we actually have to click on sounds, and we come with this pop. And I actually like that pop. I'll use that for my catching an apple sound. But I'm also going to add this chomp sound. And you might not be able to hear that from the microphone, but this pop and this chomp will make two great additions to this project, as I'll play the chomp when we reset the score and play the pop when we add to the score. And now we get pops when we catch apples and chomps when we miss them. So I'm going to leave this here, and feel free to go further with this and think about different ways of representing the sprites. You by no means need to catch apples with a bowl. You could use other sprites or other foods or other just geometric shapes that might give this game a cool feel. I encourage you to experiment. And so I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you back for the next Scratch Basics video. Thanks. Bye.